A good crew here. So my name is Daniel Harm.
Yeah.
I love big trees, and I work to protect the last remains of older naturally regenerated forests that we have on our public lands. And I'll get into the details about what that means and how we can all get involved. I work for an organization called the Center for Responsible Forestry, which focuses on conserving these older forests on state lands managed by the Department of Natural Resources. And so that's a lot of policy work, a lot of education, which we're doing today, and legislative reform to change the state laws in how our forests are managed. Because right now, we're essentially clear cutting the last remains of the older forests that we have left on our public lands to pay for essential services in counties like school construction and fire departments. So it is based in a very old law, which I hope I have time to get into. This is an hour-long presentation, so I'm going to try to cram it into 45 minutes, because this is a really complicated subject that goes back all the way to the late 1800s, when the 1889 Enabling Act put into law that the forests were designed to create revenue for the school system and beneficiaries. But a lot has changed since 1889, and so we're trying to change that. So again, we're gonna mainly focus on our state public lands. Okay, when we think of forest lands, when we think of these beautiful, we live in a beautiful state, and there's a lot of acreage of timberlands, and we have federal lands, we have private lands, but then we also have our state lands, which are literally the land of us as Washington state citizens, and the Department of Natural Resources is in charge of managing and stewarding these lands on our behalf. And currently they're operating much more like a timber industry, where they're liquidating these assets for short-term revenue. Okay, so I have a movie. I also make films, and then I also do ecological forestry and watershed restoration. And this short film will just be a good introduction. It's about 8 minutes long, into why these older forests are so important and why they're so different than industrial tree plantations. So let me hop in here, and then we will get into the lecture.
For us foresters and restoration workers, rural communities are home. We work in these woods. They're the backbone to our local economies. The long-term resilience of our watersheds and communities is inseparable from the health of our forests. We don't want to eliminate forestry. We're calling for a different approach to forestry. Forestry that's rooted in resilience. One of the main reasons our Pacific Northwest watersheds experience catastrophic floods is because of decades of clear-cut logging, which has decimated our forest's natural ability to absorb rainfall and slow the rate at which water is released back into our watersheds. Across private and public lands, including state forest managed by the Department of Natural Resources, most of what was once ancient forest has been removed. This is a DNR VRH, a variable retention harvest. That is the retention, and this is the harvest. At a watershed scale, VRH functions like clear cutting. When intact forests are clear-cut, their protective sponge-like capabilities are greatly reduced. Rainwater flows unchecked, soils wash away, and rivers swell with all of this sediment, harming salmon, aquatic life, and increasing flood risk.
Developing now on this Como weather-worn day, historic and devastating floods
continues to wreak havoc in the Green River Valley, affecting the communities of Auburn and Kent, Washington.
We are seeing evacuations in the town of Sumas, Nooksack, Everson, Marietta, just over the past couple of days.
Rural counties spend tens of millions on flood repairs. Rural counties pay these costs first, often spending far more on disaster response and repairs than they ever receive from timber revenue. These costs are rarely included when logging revenue is cited, but they are paid by local taxpayers all the same. And still, hillsides continue to be clear-cut, intensifying floods and landslide risk. Once clear-cut, these forests are often replaced with monoculture plantations, like this DNR plantation where an ancient forest once stood. These artificial tree farms lack the biodiversity and soil structure of a natural forest. On these plantations, industrial herbicides like imazapyr, triclopyr, and glyphosate are often sprayed from helicopters or by hand.
Oh, man.
One of the main industry arguments for clear cutting and herbicide spraying is that trees grow back, that trees are a renewable resource. In a way, this is true, but it undermines the fact that when you destroy an intact forested ecosystem and replace it with an artificial plantation, the forest doesn't grow back, and neither does the hydrologic integrity. So, here's the problem. Or rather, here's the solution. Older forests are hydrologically mature, the structural complexity of a healthy older forest, the sponge-like soils and root systems, the densely saturated down logs and woody debris, and the moisture-loving epiphytes and forest floor plant life. They all act like a giant sponge to absorb large volumes of heavy rainfall and release this rainfall back into the watershed at a much more uniform and predictable rate. The hydrologic maturity of older forests also keeps streams cool and clean and flowing, the lifeblood that salmon depend on. Protecting older forests and ending clear-cut logging is one of the best immediate strategies we have to protect our communities from expensive and heartbreaking damage. When a forest is clear-cut, especially an older, structurally complex, biodiverse forest, you completely destroy the forest's ability to mitigate flooding. Some of you may be asking, don't we need wood to build with? As a culture, we need wood, especially to build the homes we live in. We need to build high-quality homes that will last multiple generations, instead of fast, poorly built structures common today that are built primarily for profit, not for longevity, destined for the landfill. To produce wood, we don't need a clear-cut forest, and we don't need to spray toxic herbicides. We can create a new paradigm of forestry, teams of skilled labor, longer rotations, selective harvest, protecting mature structure complex forest, safeguarding biodiversity, and restoring degraded tree plantations so our forests stay intact and more resilient to pest, disease, wind throw, and wildfire. We need to grow, process, and utilize our wood locally. We can create more jobs in the woods through labor-intensive ecological forestry, restoration work, and watershed repair, while keeping forests functioning, watersheds intact, and rural communities strong for generations to come.
So that film was, it was pretty clear the difference between a clear cut, which is the same as a variable retention harvest, and then the difference between what they replace it with, which is an artificial tree farm, versus a natural biodiverse, a natural forest, a forest that has existed in this ecosystem for 10,000 years, right? So that's kind of laying the foundation. And do you have a question?
Yeah, so what is it called? Variable retention?
Variable retention harvest.
So it looked like they were only keeping like 2% of the trees for seed.
The legal limit is 8 trees per acre. So they have to leave 8 trees per acre.
That's such a tiny amount.
I know, and it's really wild. So the reason why I made this film was in reaction to when I was in Olympia lobbying for a bill for ecosystem services, and I was referring to clear-cutting forest, and the chair of the committee said, "Wait, we don't clear-cut our forest." And then she said, "Please explain." Then I explained to her what variable retention harvest was, and it was kind of this like light bulb. She's like, "Oh, I had no idea." And most of our politicians in Olympia have no idea. They don't spend time in the woods, and a lot of people working in the DNR, they're very industry entrenched, and they also don't spend a lot of time in the woods. It's really, hey. So I don't think I'm going to be able to cover everything, and I really want to focus on what's going on with our state lands, because that's how we can make the most change. So I'm kind of just going to rocket through the first part of my presentation. So what I was talking about in that film, let's go into present mode. There we go. Okay, excellente. So ecological forestry is a paradigm of forestry that really focuses on keeping forest intact forested canopies, not removing entire forest swaths all at once. The reason why industrial forestry is so common is because it's very lucrative for short-term profit. Most private lands these days are, let's rock into the slide. So this is just a quick slide about the benefits of having a timber industry that's worker-centered. A lot of times the industry will claim the reason why there are so many job losses in the industry is because of what conservationists have done. We've locked up so much land. But what it really comes down to is the automation of the industry has replaced human labor. And large companies like Weyerhaeuser, there was actually a big press release that they're trying to eliminate another half of their workforce by using automated machines. So it's not the conservationists, it's the privatization and the automation of the industry that has led to so many job losses. But with ecological forestry, it requires human beings on the ground, highly skilled labor. You can't replicate that. And there's a whole host of other reasons, but again, we want to rocket through and really get to focus on how we can get involved in protecting the last remains of these older forests on our state lands. These are some fun examples of wooden structures that are still in existence. Wood can last a really, really long time. I think the biggest pushback we get about, these are beautiful temples, and right now a really big hot topic is affordable housing. But affordability doesn't have to mean short lifespan. Why can't affordability mean structures that are built to be affordable for generations and generations and generations? It just goes to show that wood can last a long time. And another big push from the industry is they say that, well, our practices are sequestering wood. And I understand that. Like, This wood has been sequestered for 1,300 years. What a beautiful and marvelous way to sequester wood. But we don't live in the culture that built this 1,300 years ago. We live in a disposable culture where the majority of our wood now ends up in landfills. So we have, a live tree 100%. When they log it, 46% is just left as slash. And then you have mill residue. These days they are getting more efficient with using mill residue for other commercialized markets, the transportation, but you're really only left with a small amount that is actually sequestered. I am absolutely all for wood sequestration in beautifully built buildings. Please.
Thanks. Is wood harvested after a forest fire, and do those statistics change?
That's actually a beautiful question. It's called salvage logging, and I really recommend both this book. Oh, damn, I think I lent it out. Oh. So Chad Hansen has a book called Smokescreen that gets into the debunking myths around wildfire, which is really important. We're not going to get into wildfire. That's another 2-hour lecture. But there are so many myths around wildfire. And the industry, what they will do after a forest fire is they will claim that the forest has killed this ecosystem. That's total BS. Fire and forest are inseparable. Fire is the lifeblood of forest. And a forest post-fire is one of the most biodiverse ecosystem there is. It explodes with life. It's especially for birds and insects. It's mind-blowing. And what logging companies will do is they say that it's dead, and they'll go in there and then they'll essentially take all of the salvageable wood, and through that process they'll compact the ground, and they'll essentially they'll kill it through claiming it's dead. It's a really bizarre process. The industry has a lot of ways that they kind of sneak in there and get their wood that isn't based in ecological science. And as a Western culture, we're kind of catching up with it, right? It wasn't until really Jerry Franklin, I wish I could show this other film, but Jerry Franklin, in the last 40 years, he put the concept of old growth forests in our consciousness. We didn't understand the importance of them. So we're catching up to these things, but that's a great question. Check out Chad Hansen's book, Smokescreen.
What was the question?
It was about salvage logging, which is after wildfire, what happens to the timber, and that a forest will rebound after a forest fire, and in many cases, anywho, if we have time for questions at the end, let's hammer them out. But I really want to get to the meat of it. But that was a great question. I really appreciate it. So most of our forests are they're really run for quarterly profits. Our private forests they're managed for quarterly profits, not for ecological integrity. So all of these large private landscapes owned by the Weyerhaeusers of the world, they're what are called real estate investment trusts, and where forests are treated as financial assets. And so every quarter, the investors get assets. It's really mind-blowing. So it's really the financialization and the privatization that has led to the degradation of our natural forests. Another claim by the industry is that, so I do want to pull up some notes here that I'll read off. So the standard practice right now is to clear cut forest every 30 to 40 years. So when you think of an older natural forest, the forests that have been here for 10,000 years, they cut them down and then they replace them with monoculture tree farms, as I showed in the film. And then they harvest those every 30 to 40 years. But trees, specifically Douglas fir trees, which is the primary cash crop tree, they're capable of living 800 to 1,200 years. That's their normal lifespan. There's kind of this understanding that old growth are really special, that they're really unique. They're actually not at all. Trees are supposed to be old growth. That is their normal lifespan. They're supposed to get that big. The reason why we see them as special is because we've logged almost all of them out of existence. So there's barely any left, and they seem spectacular. But this, literally where we are sitting right now was all lowland old growth forest, dominated by 800 to 1,200-year-old trees. That's the natural life cycle. So we're literally clear cutting these trees when they're infants, before they're reaching any of their most powerful ecological assets. And another fascinating part too is that when a tree dies after 800 to 1,200 years, they have a second life because they slowly decay over centuries. And the decaying wood in these forests builds the very soil that gives the forest the abundance of life. And so big timber, when they're cutting and replanting over and over and over, they're degrading and using soil that literally took 10,000 years to form. So it's not a sustainable practice, and that's one of many reasons. Okay, so I have a lot more to say about that ecology, but we're gonna. Okay, so another main argument is that you'll hear that, like, the industry is so good at kind of spinning science, where they'll claim that that these clear-cut harvest and replant plantations are more efficient at utilizing carbon or storing carbon than older forest. Small trees grow faster, but they're way more efficient. So it's a matter of, would you rather have 50% of $5 or 20% of $100? So young trees, they're growing much faster, just like a young kid is growing faster than a human adult. But the large trees, they're storing all of that carbon, right? They're storing all that carbon. Just think of an enormous tree. Think of how much wood is in there versus how much wood is in a spindly little tiny baby tree. And carbon is only one ingredient of the picture as well. So it's true that younger trees sequester carbon at a faster rate than older trees, but older trees have already sequestered that carbon, they're storing that carbon, and they're still sequestering that carbon. But we can't just focus on the sequestration of a tree itself. What about the soil of these older forests? That's where 50% of the carbon is. And the industry doesn't account for that science. And they don't account for evapotranspiration either, the efficiency of water. Young plantations use an exorbitant amount of water because these young trees waste water, where older trees are much more efficient. And just like we saw in that video, they're hydrologically mature, so they're very efficient with their use of water, and they create these microclimates. This is a great example, actually. So this is an old growth tree. This is probably a 500-year-old tree, where this is the crown of an adult tree. So trees, genetically, they hit a certain height. So Douglas firs, it's usually around 300 feet, right? So this is a young adult right here. This is a young adult, where this is a mature adult. And like human years, this is like a 22-year-old, where this is like a 50-year-old. And once trees hit a certain height, what they do is they start to stack carbon. They fill out, they fill out, they fill out. And you can even see it in its crown, right? All the way up. It just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. So there's just so much more carbon than in this tree. And this is probably like 150 years old, you know? So if we could at least, when I say longer rotations, like if we're going to grow wood, we might as well grow trees to 150 years old. Because not only is it helping extend the life cycle of a healthy forest, especially when you selectively harvest, where you're not removing the entire canopy at once, but you also get way better wood. Like here's a good example. With younger trees, here are these older trees, right? You don't see any branches down near the bottom, but you can see these younger trees, they're filled with branches. That means all this wood has knots in it. And knots is like really low quality lumber for any people who build, where older trees produce way higher quality type grain lumber. Younger plantations are also way more susceptible to fire. These older trees, and this is a genetic composition, is when they get older, their bark gets extremely thick and furrowed, and that's for wildfire resistance. So like think of, and not only is this filled with water, well, this summer I'm gonna make a counterpart to the film I just made. The film I just made was about the winter and floods, and we're gonna make a film about fire and drought. But older forests are way more fire resilient because they also store all that water in the winter as well. Just kind of look at it visually and think, does this look more fire prone, or does that look more fire prone? Right? Okay, so I already said, so old growth, so these are just some fun pictures of like old school logging. This is like first wave clear cuts. This is before they were forced by the Supreme Court to replant. They just essentially just cut and ran, which is really interesting because this is where legacy forests come from. So here we go. So what is a legacy forest, right? When I say legacy forest, this is the subset of forest on DNR land that we are trying to protect. These forests, the reason they're rare is because in the early days of logging, they clear cut a large swath of area and they didn't replant it with industrial tree farms. So what that means is they didn't erase the original genetic composition of that landscape. And just through happenstance, they all grew back, and now they exist right now. So we have these forests that were logged sporadically before 1945, before industrial logging. They weren't planted, so they grew back naturally. A lot of them were high graded. High graded means you go in and you just take the best. So in these legacy forests, there are still a lot of actual old growth remnants. Like I live next door to an old legacy forest, and there's about 50 500-year-old trees in this legacy forest that has an average stand age of 140 years old. So the average age of this forest is 140 years old, but there's about 50 500-year-old trees in it. And the DNR is still allowed to log this forest. They can't log the 500-year-old trees, but they can clear cut everything else around it and replace it with a monocrop plantation. So they're structurally complex, right? They're not these simplified farms. They have all the structural complexity, which has a whole host of habitat reasons. They're genetically and biologically diverse, so they have the same genetic diversity from 10,000 years ago. And ultimately, they're going to be the old growth of our future. If we let them continue to grow, they will all become old growth. So why are they so important? They reduce flood by absorbing rainfall. They reduce drought by storing water more efficiently. Temperature reduction, evapotranspiration. It's supposed to be on the same one. They store and filter drinking water. They maintain summer stream flows for salmon. So in the summertime, since they're hydrologically mature, they also feed our water systems with water. Where tree plantations, they suck up so much water. So essentially in the summertime, we don't have enough water in our rivers for salmon to exist, and the water temperature increases. This is all downstream effects of clear-cut logging. Clear-cut logging has decimated our watersheds, and along with that, a lot of our riparian life forms, our salmonoids. They decrease wildfire, they sequester and store vast amounts of carbon, yada, yada, yada. Let's get on to the policy. So this is kind of just shows that like, when you have a structurally complex forest, it creates habitat for such a whole different form of species. They use so many different layers of the canopy. This is the succession of a forest. So this is kind of the life cycle of it from wildfire, right? From a fire, and then it starts to regenerate, etc. This is the natural life cycle of a forest, especially these type of forests here. Not all forests are spawned from wildfire. So this just really goes into low flows. We're having like catastrophic low flows in the Nooksack watershed where I live. This is all resulting of clear cutting and so forth. Okay, so this is where we get to the meat of it. Let me do a quick time check. Okay, we're gonna hammer this out. So these are our state trust lands. So these were lands that in the late 1800s were entrusted to the state to manage on behalf of the people. And so the DNR, there's 22 million acres of forest land in Washington. 9.5 million of it is federal. 1.7 million is tribal. 7.9 is private. So these are the Weyerhaeusers, the Sierra Pacific Industries, the Hamiltons. These are all tree farms. So we essentially have 8 million acres of just tree farms, clear cuts being cut every 30 years and sprayed with aerial herbicides on a routine basis. And the aerial herbicides, they're also not subject to agricultural regulations. So they're laced with surfactants. So when you hear things like glyphosate and all those other chemicals that are harmful to us, imagine taking those harmful chemicals and multiplying them by factors of 10s because they're laced with other chemicals that are only allowed in forest management. So they don't have to follow any of the rules that agriculture does. So the chemical cocktail is horrendous. Surfactants are actually much more toxic than the herbicides themselves. anyways, there's so much to cover. And so it's 2.4 million acres are state lands, our public lands, the Department of Natural Resources. These are our public lands. And 1.7 million is on the west side, right? The west side of the Cascade, these beautiful old forests. And of that 1.7 million acres, there's only 77,000 acres that are these legacy forests that are still being clear cut to this day. And we'll get into it. So it's only 4%. It's 4%. I'll just kind of rush through this. This is essentially just saying that there is barely anything left. And there's a lot of claims that the DNR protects a lot of forest, but it's mapping, it's like mapping wordsmithing, where most of what's protected isn't actually protected. It can be available for logging under special occasions. A lot of it is just inaccessible because it's high alpine terrain. A lot of it is in riparian areas, which are already protected in the first place, so it's essentially double counting. And so when it comes down to it, only about 17% of our forest lands are actually protected when you really do the math. So these are where all these forests are located. So the red are unprotected, and then the green are protected. So there's still a lot that are unprotected. Coastal temperate rainforest are among the rarest ecosystems in the world. We live in like the most incredible ecosystem magic on Earth. Like it's just phenomenal how lucky we are and how rare these ecosystems are. They're rapidly disappearing. Okay, so this is where we really kind of get into like policy reform. Like what strategies do we have to push this agenda forward and to make change in state law? So these rare forests, often the costs are externalized onto the public, okay? So right now, one of the jobs that we're taking on in collaboration with a whole host of other nonprofits is that we're trying to actually show economically what the true cost of logging is, the full balance sheet. Because right now, the main argument from trust beneficiaries, the trust beneficiaries who receive the revenue, and then of course the logging industry who is very financially incentivized, is they're like, well, you're taking our money away from us. You know, it's like we normally get X amount of money, and now we're not getting that amount of money. And the county's like, we get $4 million a year. That's a lot of money. That's a lot of money. But what if it cost $100 million? What if it cost the county $100 million a year to perpetuate these practices? Does that $4 million really matter if it's costing the county $100 million to get that $4 million? And that is the major economic project that we're going on right now. So what is the cost of landslide cleanup, right? Like all those long scars down the mountainside that look like rivers, those were landslides where the soil that took 10,000 years washed away down to the solid bedrock. So when I was hiking down that landslide, essentially I was hiking on solid bedrock. So all of that soil that had been there for millennia, gone in one event. And they happen all the time, and we have maps. So we're going into maps and doing like very, very technical map work because all of these events, all these landslide events are recorded on these public databases, and we can find out if they're correlated downstream of clear cuts. And if they're downstream of clear cuts from 10 to 15 years, there's a very strong argument that clear cuts was the cause for it. And then in county records, it shows how much these repairs cost. Riparian costs. Here's a really good example. So the Middle Fork Nooksack Dam cost $20 million to remove this dam. The same year that the Middle Fork Nooksack Dam was removed, a $20 million project, the DNR wanted to clear cut this entire area. This is where the dam was removed, and they wanted to clear cut all of that. The same year. Like, to me, that just makes no economic sense. Why would you spend 20, and this is for salmon rehabilitation. Mm-hmm. There are hundreds of peer-reviewed studies that correlate sedimentation, right? All that sediment, because when you remove the forest, the soil's exposed, you get a heavy rain, all that soil washes in. That's what a landslide. All the sediment goes into the river and it kills salmonoids. Mm-hmm. It's mind-blowing. So this, you can see right here, this is called mass wasting.
Yeah.
So essentially this is a landslide already happening by itself. And then they were going to remove all of this, and you would just have an enormous, This, I can't tell you how, I've been mountaineering for 20 years. This is effing steep. No one should be logging here. We saved that forest, by the way. Okay, so the DNR is separate from, in Washington State, you kind of have two leaders. You have the governor, Ferguson. He's in control of civilization. He has a lot of power, but the DNR kind of just does its own thing, and no one really knows what the DNR is. And the DNR is ran by the commissioner, right? And the commissioner, and they control our public lands. So you have the commissioner controlling our public lands. You have the governor controlling civilization. The governor does have more power and can assert more power, and we're trying to influence that because there's a massive disconnect. They really have no idea what's going on. They're clueless. I'm sorry, I'm just being really blunt because I got a lot to cover. But before we had Hillary Franz, our previous commissioner, and she was liquidating legacy forests like no big deal. Let's just get the money and run. Let's go, let's go, let's go. Then this guy named Dave Upthegrove, he's actually King County County Council member, comes from environmental roots, and his campaign promise is we're never going to cut any more legacy forests ever again. Help me be commissioner. So all the enviros went super hard and got him in, and he is in this really challenging position. And the DNR, we'll get into it. So like the short story is we are still clear cutting legacy forests. Dave Upthegrove has not stopped cutting them, and the rate has slowed. This person would know how many acres would be logged in the 5-year plan. Is it like 17,000? 20s. Okay. So essentially, Dave Upthegrove, the first year he came into office, he said, we're going to pause clear cutting all these legacy forests to find out how many we actually have. How many do we have? And they found out that they have a little bit more than 77,000. And so he's like, okay, well, I'm going to stand by we thought we had 77,000 acres, so I'm going to promise to conserve those 77,000 acres. But since we found a little bit more, we're going to start clear cutting those to help us transition through this budgetary difficulty that we have over the next 5 years. And we're going to create this thing called a 5-year plan, where we'll conserve the 77,000 acres, even though that's still nebulous and it's an executive order, so it could, at this point, be overturned in the next commissionership 3 years down the line. So our real big push is how in this 4-year term can we get these 77,000 acres protected in perpetuity? And there's a lot of different mechanisms that we're poking on and prodding on. Yeah, we don't need to get into more details with that. So the DNR's mission is to manage, sustain, and protect the health. This is literally their mission statement, right? This is their mission statement. It's to manage, sustain, and protect the health and productivity of Washington's lands and waters to meet the needs of present and future generations, right? That's their mission statement. That's what they're supposed to do. We'll let the picture snap. Okay, so who makes the decisions? I'm going to rocket through this really quick. So the Board of Natural Resources makes all the decisions. So every month there is a meeting where they're given a packet of timber sales. Hey board, can we log these? And every month there's a bunch of legacy forest in there. Can we log these? Who makes the vote? Dave Upthegrove, he's one of the votes, a governor designee, so someone coming from Ferguson. We have the superintendent of public instructions, Chris Rakedahl. We have representatives from the University of Washington right next door, Dan Brown. We have Wazoo, a new representative, help me with his name. Raj, we love Raj. Raj is asking a lot of questions. And then we have a county commissioner that's like, we love logging because we get all that money. So every month they say, yes, go ahead and log all those. Wow. And so it's very incentivized. Like the people who are managing this board all receive revenue from this. They're the revenue and not only that, but staff salary is dependent upon that revenue as well. So the staff is getting paid, it's not taxed by, they're getting paid from timber revenue. And who's missing? So we have no tribal governments on the board, we have no conservation scientists on the board, we have no public health experts on the board, we have no environmental justice community, and the general public isn't represented either. Okay, so is DNR a logging company or a perpetual trust designed to steward our public lands? Like in law, they're a perpetual trust meant to steward our lands for intergenerational equity. You're supposed to manage these lands forever. Like forever is a really, really long time. And if you're liquidating one of the rarest forest types that we have in our ecosystem, it kind of creates a little bit of a conundrum. There's a major legal turning point. So in 2022, Conservation Northwest versus Franz, where we had Hillary Franz, they took them to court about look, you're supposed to be managing these lands for all the people. It's written in our Constitution, all the people, right here. So Article 6, Section 1 of the Washington Constitution, DNR must manage trust lands for all the people. And the court unanimously affirmed that the DNR can manage these lands for a myriad of benefits, not solely for maximizing maximizing timber revenue, which is one of the main arguments that brought up all the time, that we're supposed to be maximizing revenue for our beneficiaries. This is just a cool excerpt from that law case. So the policy problem today, I won't get into the weeds with this, but essentially they're violating the Habitat Conservation Plan. One interesting part is in the Habitat Conservation Plan, the DNR is required to achieve they're supposed to be required to maintain 15% of older forests in all of their planning units right now. But you can see, so they're supposed to have 15% across the board at a minimum based on the HGP, which is a policy that has been federally signed on, the 1997 HCC policy. You have, in the South Coast Planning Unit, there's 0.1% older forest. There's right now 0.1%. But what they're saying is they're calculating, they're like, well, there's only 0.1% right now in 2000, this is in 2021. It's actually 0.07% right now. Right? And so it's like their claim is like, well, if we let them grow, we'll hit 15% in 2110. So we can log them right now because they'll just grow back. Has anyone heard of climate change? Are you sure that a perpetual trust is going to be able to regrow the forest that you're currently liquidating by 2110? Okay, so I got into this. This is really the major crux, is that these rural communities and junior taxing districts are financially dependent upon this revenue, and that's why we have to reform policy and law and this financial structuring, because it's just this dependent feedback loop, and you have like we are the minority of most people want this money. Timber revenue funds school funding. Chris Rakedahl, who is our superintendent of public instruction, he consistently votes no against logging these forests, and he's putting in a lot of work to try to change how school construction is being funded. Okay. And what's interesting is that from the state, this timber revenue contributes to less than 1% of the statewide school construction, but they really need that 1%. So let's go ahead and keep logging those forests. Core policy chains. A structural contradiction exists. Statewide education funding barely relies on timber revenue, yet local governments stay dependent on it, therefore reinforcing a pressure to log trust lands. Modernizing the funding system would decouple essential public services from logging, allowing forest policy to prioritize long-term ecological health, and most importantly, intergenerational stewardship of the public trust. Breaking the false choice. This is essentially what I'm talking about. The false choice is we must log our forests aggressively or lose funding for schools in rural communities. And we are arguing that there's a better way to do things. We can find revenue elsewhere, and we can use our forest for more important things that save us money, et cetera, et cetera. I covered a lot of these topics. So this is really fascinating. How much time do I have, Jessica?
We need to wrap it up. 2 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we get a lot of industry arguments that are just BS. And so these are, if I had more time, I'd kind of go into the nuances of like how they try to undermine our claims. Maybe we can, they're kind of long, but I'm also willing to share this slide deck if anyone wants it. So why this matters, I've gone over that. Rural communities really bear the brunt of this. All those, we'll let a picture be taken. And how citizens can get involved. So knowledge is power. This is a big way. So we're working on what our legislative strategy is. And the more people that know about this subject, and the more people that get into the weeds, and the more people that then articulate the nuances of this issue, the better, right? Like, we don't need people that like, stop cutting trees, that's bad. It's like, no, we need to know what's actually happening, all the specifics, so we can then go to our representatives and educate them about why we need to reform this outdated system that was established in 1889. And so what we do as an organization, I'm the person in charge of sending out newsletters, so you will not get any spam, because I send out one maybe every 2 months. But it's educational content, like video, like that video I made, and then also how to take action. Essentially, like if we create a legislative campaign, how to sign on, other ways to get involved, etc. And these are essentially things that we're working on right now, if you want to take a picture on. So a lot of the emails will be about these topics and ways that we can reinforce making these changes. And there you go. Woo!